All right, it is 6 o'clock, so I will call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. exactly. I want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. With that, can I have an approval of the agenda, please? Move approval. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have one set of minutes from March the 4th. If there are no errors or omissions, can I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Public participation. Chris.
Anybody else?
So Dean made me write everything down and promised to speak for 20-25 minutes to try and make this a nice long meeting. No, I have two questions, if I could, Honorable Chairperson. More to gain a sense of understanding about one of the items in the 5-year financial plan, that being the beach nourishment project that's presented on page 96 of the plan and valued at $670-some-odd-thousand. Am I correct in understanding that the taxpayer is going to be paying that amount, and that once the tax bylaw has been passed, that city staff will proceed with that project without any further input from council? Is that correct?
Mr. Pease?
Through the chair, although council will presumably approve the budget, the actual nourishment plan will come back to council as an item, so you know exactly what's going to be done.
So if I might follow up on that then, at this point, the taxpayer is going to pay $670,000 for an as-of-yet undefined project. Is that correct?
Chris?
To some extent, one could say yes to that. However, what it really is the movement of sand from one area to another, or bringing sand in to re-nourish the foreshore.
Thank you. And different topic now. About a year ago, the city offered coarse woody mulch to residents at this time of year for gardeners who like to fertilize things naturally, using the debris and branches that people would drop off at the bi-weekly, soon to be hopefully weekly branch drop-off program. That program seemed to be discontinued rather abruptly last summer, and I don't know if that was due to some staffing changes that occurred or what, but just before the election I had the opportunity to speak with the Director of Engineering and Public Works about it, and I was left kind of uncertain as to whether that program would be returning or whether it's been scrapped, and if it had been, what the rationale was for removing that service to our citizens.
Great. So I think what we can do, Mr. Pease, is, and if you want to find out some more information on that particular subject, and to be able to report back, because I'm not sure that staff would have the answer to that quite yet, but we can certainly get more information.
That's correct. We can get you an answer.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we will go to new business, a report from the Director of Finance on the sewer infrastructure replacement funding. Christopher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I haven't prepared a presentation. However, the options before council can essentially be summarized into 3 or 4 options. Option number 1 would be to begin funding our sustainable infrastructure of our sewer infrastructure by levying a parcel tax, which would be subject to only local area service residents, whether connected or not connected to sewer. That's option number 1. Option number 2, by levying a sewer user fee, which would apply to only properties connected to sewer. Option number 3 would be a combination of those two. And option number 4 is to defer and ask for further information from staff, or to pursue in a different calendar year. There are some limitations in terms of timing if council wishes to pursue any of these options. The parcel tax option requires approximately 6 to 7 weeks of administrative time to ensure that we adhere to all of the legislation and proper legal review. sewer user fee can be implemented rather quickly in comparison. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it is the staff recommendation that we implement a main LAS parcel tax, as I understand it. So with that, we'll open it up to the public for a comment. No? Committee. Stuart?
A few comments, but firstly, I'm concerned, I guess, that the size of the sewer tax is so similar to the existing cost of the services under existing local area services, and I struggled with that because it just seems to me that putting money away to buy something a long time in the future should be less expensive than paying off something you bought 15 years ago over 15 years. And I guess, am I correct in assuming that's because we're looking at the replacement cost of a let's say it's a sewer coming out of Royal Bay that sized to service 7,000 people. And right now we're looking at a replacement tax from, let's say, 1,000 people that would be based on the ultimate replacement of that. So am I correct in that sort of rough mathematics?
Chris?
Through the chair, if I understand your question correctly, Councillor Parkinson, I believe what you're bringing to the attention of the table is that we currently collect approximately $630,000 in parcel taxes, but our sustainable infrastructure plan says we should be setting aside $900,000. So how is it that the infrastructure cost of something spread over 15 to 30 years is $600, but something spread over the remaining 50 years is $900,000? And the answer to that is threefold, I would say. First of all, there are a number of sewer infrastructure. There's a bunch of sewer infrastructure around the city, which the local area service taxes have since expired, so many years ago. So you look at the sewer infrastructure down at Belmont Road, for instance. So we're not currently collecting parcel taxes on that. So that would not be included in your comparison. And then, of course, there's just the inflationary factor of what the sewer will cost many years from now, discounted back to current date. So I believe that probably explains the difference substantially.
So, but if the sorry if I'm hogging the table here, if Royal Bay was fully built out, the cost you were looking at for replacing the infrastructure many years down the road wouldn't change. And so therefore the required tax burden on each home would be divided by a much larger number than it is at present. So if we keep the one number fixed of what the long-term infrastructure cost is and change what we divide it by, those numbers can change dramatically. And I guess I'm questioning the fairness of that rationale, that as today you might be paying, let's say, 1/1000th of the cost, whereas the sewers were built for 7,000, and so therefore it's probably fairer for you to be paying 1/7000th of the cost as opposed to 1/1000th of the cost.
That's a good point.
That was a point rather than a question, I'm assuming.
So I just thought I'd help move along.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you. Did you have another question, Stuart, before I go to Michael?
Let's let some others talk here, but I have some more.
Michael.
That is a good question, and I think it's one of the things that's the difference between the user fee and the parcel tax, because the parcel tax, because it works on development potential, already taxes the 1/7000th, perhaps, or at least 1/5000th for one user. So it already achieves what you're asking for, but the user fee, of course, can't do that. And there, I think that problem is inherent in the user fee method. That's all I got to say.
That's a good point. I'm appreciating all these points. Councillor Day, what's your point?
So, and I may have had this a little bit skewed because I was trying to read the bylaw online that this applies to, and through email discussion late this afternoon realized that I was looking at the wrong bylaw, so I was trying to determine who's covered, and I guess we'll have to work on where we find bylaw number 598 because it was very difficult. In fact, I could not find it on our intranet whatsoever. So what I had was bylaw 1500, which is looking at the user fees. So very similar and very obviously easy to confuse one with the other because the maps more or less look the same. So with the establishment of a parcel tax, my concern is that we don't start charging our septic users for our sewer system because we do have a large number of people who cannot now or possibly in the foreseeable future participate in that service. And there is already the inequity of all of us paying towards the sewage treatment plant. So I was concerned that we didn't have any of our septic users included in our statistics that we were using to compare, you know, how this is going to look. So thankfully, Christopher, our director of finance, put me on the right track and provided me with a copy of the bylaw. So, and it does clearly state in that bylaw that it represents the area of the city that can benefit from the sewer, but it also says that the debt created by the bylaw is limited to 15 years. So I'm just wondering to the Director of Finance, are we writing a whole new bylaw that would be the parcel tax bylaw then? Because there's a lot of conditions in this bylaw that would be very difficult to apply.
Good question. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have a separate bylaw called the Parcel Tax Preparation Bylaw, which refers to the various local area service bylaws. And so it refers to bylaw 598 for Maine. And the only change that's needed is for a rate to be inputted. So there's actually not a significant bylaw amendment that needs to occur in order for us to levy a Maine local area service parcel tax. The 15 years for the debt really refers to the original debt for which Maine originally was for. The purpose of that local area service was amended in 2012 as bylaw 598 was amended. And so really the purpose of Maine now is to fund capital enhancements or maintenance of the entire existing sewer infrastructure network.
Dean? Dean first, and then the mayor, and then Stuart first.
Thank you. A question for staff, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the revenue table. I see there's no revenue from Southwest or Maine this year. Is that correct? Is that my understanding?
Through the chair, if we don't levy any new tax, then yes.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the table here. But specifically, this bylaw refers strictly to the Maine local service area. Is that right?
Yes.
Why are we not talking about the other two, South and West? Are those paid out as well?
Yes, South and West are expiring this year, and all Southwest, Central, and what am I missing? East. They all belong to Maine, It's a little bit confusing, but if you're part of South, West, East, or Central, you're also part of Maine.
What was I thinking? God. All right. Well, that answers that. So, in other words, we're not going to have to revisit this as each LSA is paid out.
Correct. If we start levying on Maine as staff are proposing, then as all the other expire, they'll simply pick up on Maine.
Okay, and just to follow up to Councillor Day's question, do we have a, excuse me, I'm asking out of my own ignorance, do we have a large number of members in our community that are on septic but live or are capable of hooking up to the sewer tomorrow if they so decide?
Through the chair, I can't give you an exact number, but my instinct is there aren't a lot. An example would be Allendale Pit, which is central LES, but is undeveloped. So it's mostly undeveloped lots of land that have sewer infrastructure running in front of them.
I guess my concern would be if we have a line going down a street where people are on septic and just haven't bothered to connect as of yet. Well, I think that we should be speaking to those people as well, because their septic field could be failing as we speak. And it's about that potential connection, as Councillor Baxter mentioned. That's an opinion and a statement more than a question, sorry.
Seems that we're on a roll, Mayor.
Thank you. Can you, through the chair to staff, can you explain why is not latecomers agreements just picking up that cost? What I'm not understanding is, I'm a little confused because I still got the old LASs 5, 3, and 1, and as you join in, you're paying off of someone else's portion. Once these lines are paid for, and new people are coming onto the line, why is that revenue not going for replacement costs? So if we're using, for example, Councillor Parkinson's numbers of 1,000, and that there's a potential of 7,000 that should be hooking into that line, why isn't the people who are latecomers who are joining picking up that replacement plan for the next 15 to 20 years? I'm not saying it's sustainable long term. Long term, it's certainly not sustainable, that we will need to shift to this eventually. But we feel like, or at least I feel like, we're so young in this and we still have so much more potential for capacity that do we really need to be looking at replacement costs now? And that's my question to staff.
Thank you, through the chair. So latecomers, as I understand them, they're mostly appropriate for when a developer or someone who's subdividing is forced to build infrastructure that is excess to what is germane to that subdivision. And so what has happened historically, as I understand it, is the infrastructure was put in, but the infrastructure that was put in was adjacent to the property for which it applied to, so latecomers wouldn't apply. If, for instance, we forced Royal Bay to run a line, run infrastructure all the way down Machosen Road, and it passed a bunch of property that isn't germane to its development, then we could collect latecomers from the next development that came on site to the project. So latecomers has to be instituted prior to the infrastructure going in, for one. But I think what I understand that the concept that you're saying is, once a certain neighborhood has paid down the local area service, and then other folks jump on, now all of a sudden they don't have to pay a portion of the debt that the previous development. It seems unfair, yeah, and that's what's happening in many cases.
So just as a quick follow-up for I do not know this. So when my personal property, when I went on, I had to pay a fee to join on, whatever it was. I had $5,000 or whatever that number was. With the new constructions that's happening, for example, in Royal Bay, all those single-family homes that are now logging into our sewer system, has the developer previously already paid for all that capacity, or are they paying that every time that house comes online now and that there's now residents in that house?
Through the chair, there's a lot of things So at the time of connection, a single-family dwelling that connects, they have to pay a number of fees. The connection fee, that's just to connect the private property to the sewer main. They have to pay an enhancement fee. That's if you subdivide, there's going to be an assumption that there's going to be excess capacity needed, so you're going to need to upsize the infrastructure in the future. That's another thing. The cost to build the actual main, the infrastructure, can be borne a number of ways. It can be borne by the property for which it benefits. That's usually through a local area service, or by the developers just putting it in there as part of the development. In those cases, most of the time is that sewer main is constructed just for the benefit of the development in question. However, if you think for example, Royal Bay. Royal Bay South and North, they're on one side of Machosen Road, and Royal Beach is on the other side. So let's suppose, for example, that Royal Bay built a line all the way down Machosen Road so they could connect everyone on the Royal Bay side. And then Royal Beach came along and connected to those mains. It would be unfair for them to be able to connect to those mains and not contribute to the cost of that infrastructure. So theoretically, what could have happened is we could have forced Royal Bay to build that line all the way down Machosen Road, and we would collect latecomers from Royal Beach to pay back to Royal Bay. Now, I can't tell you the history of actually how every segment of infrastructure was built, but there's certain cases where those models of financing are appropriate, and I'd have to look at a specific example to answer specifically.
Sorry, just as a quick follow-up to that. What I guess I understand, and I'm not holding you to that, you don't have to give me an answer immediately. I guess my question, though, is, and I understand those three fees that you're talking about, the hookup fee and so on. What I'm trying to understand is, did the previous owners of Royal Bay pay for the infrastructure of the sewer main, and so that they feel as though they no longer have to contribute to that, or are these single-family lots that are now being serviced being charged their portion of what that sewer charge cost was? I'm just trying to understand which it is.
Right, so through the chair, supposing that there is a LAS that's still outstanding, as the single-family lots that connect to that sewer main do that, they then take on a burden of that LAS. So we take the total, we have to make a total debt payment every single year on behalf of an LAS. We split it between the total number of taxable parcels. So if you subdivide, as you described, then the new subdivided lots would take a portion of that. Yeah.
Okay. And just not to skip you, Stuart, but I think Michael wants to kind of add something to Rob's question.
Since 2011, Royal Bay has been paying on a development potential basis, and therefore every lot that they're now developing, they have been paying the tax burden for that lot since 2011. Before that, I can't remember how many years that was, they weren't. So the answer is yes, they have been paying, and no, they haven't, depending on which time period.
Thank you. Stuart.
And just unfortunately, latecomers would typically go to the developer, not the city. So, you know, so I got to tell you, I think this is a fairly complex issue, and I struggled with reading it. I've struggled to really grasp and understand it, and I think that it's only fair if we're asking staff or directing staff that we sort of give them the principles on which we're basing our decisions. And if that's appropriate, I sort of wrote out a few that I think we should discuss and agree on or disagree on and come up with. I think that'll be very helpful for us all to get on the same page and to pass this information on to staff to help them. So I have these here, and I'm prepared to talk through them and have a discussion on a number of these points. So I hope I'm not out of turn by doing this, but as I said, I struggled trying to rationalize how to come to the correct decision on this, because I guess it matters, and I don't have it. So the first, I mean, again, if we're trying to build a foundation for this decision, the first thing we have to know is, do we want to plan for long-term sustainable infrastructure replacement? And again, I think we're past that. I believe that we've agreed on that as we maybe there's some discussion on what exactly the mechanism might look like. But I think we believe that that's a good thing to do, and we're going down that path. The second thing we have to decide is, do we want a separate fund for sewers, or do we just have a general overall sustainable infrastructure reserve fund? And this is probably one that we may want to talk about. I think that there's some arguments on both sides. And again, as long as the money's there somewhere, it maybe isn't a lot critical one way or the other, but it might be as far as the discussion today goes. Do we want to have a separate sewer infrastructure fund, or do we want to have just one overall one? I think that staff's recommending we have a separate sewer one, and that's probably the way to go if they recommend it. But it doesn't have to be, and it's a decision that we make that gives them guidance. So anybody got any thoughts along those lines?
So do you want to have, sorry, Chris, looks like you wanted to have a chat.
No, just on, Mr. Chairman, just on that point in terms of a sewer fund specifically for sewers, I recommend to this council that they maintain a separate sewer fund only because of the problems we've had in the past, and also that we're still building the sewers out now, and there's lots of cost implications. So to keep the reserve fund separated from any other funds to do with sustainability would be a preferred way to go.
I think Cynthia and then Doug.
So the only difficulty that I have with the big general principles is that over time the details can really muck those general principles up. For example, when we originally instituted the sewers and we had all the different LASs, they eventually became a problem. At the time, it seemed like a good answer for, that these properties on this road wanted a sewer and it cost this much to do it. And these properties on a different road was a different number. They had different problems. And it seemed fair, given that the sewer users that were being developed were quite different. If you were on Latoria Road was very different from if you were in Belmont Park. So it made a lot of sense to keep them separate. As time went on, there was more good reasons to kind of put them all together, hence the big consolidation. But that consolidation did take a lot of resources to do. It took a lot of staff, it took a lot of meetings, it took a lot of community buy-in. So I don't think we should enter into any of those discussions lightly. And when we do I think everyone agrees with the big picture thinking that we should be setting aside enough money that we can replace this infrastructure in the future. But where that gets more difficult, at least for me, is when we don't have really good clarity about how that money is allowed to be used. So, in the case of our sewer system in the past, some of the people who got involved in sewers got some really great grants. They, what they actually paid was a lot less than what some other people eventually paid. And we certainly had a lot of difficulties in terms of getting that understanding, which I guess that's what all court cases are. Is there a difference of understanding in terms of what's covered by the agreement that you have? So I guess my concern is that I don't want to see us tying up all of our tax revenue in a way that doesn't allow us any flexibility in the future, because we really could kind of paint ourselves into a corner where we've said we need, this much for our sustainable capital replacement fund, and meanwhile we can't afford to do the things that the city would like to do because, and yet at the same time we don't maybe have a particular project where that money is earmarked to go for. So I think we have to be careful in how far forward we think and make whatever we do be very closely tied to reports that can tell you, you got, X kilometers of sewer line, and if there's an earthquake and we have to fix them, here's an estimate of what that would cost.
Ed?
It's the way I look at this is I never like general revenue funds, period. As you know, we get careless with those. And the principle here is that the people that are paying it are the users, basically, right? So I would expect my dollar, and I happen to be on one of those lucky people that happen to be on sewer. And if I'm willing to pay this $11, whatever it is, I would expect it to go towards the sewer. I don't want it into a general fund. It's the principle of who pays, right? You go back to that principle. And to me, like I said, I'm just against general funds because I've seen how they've been used and abused throughout government. I mean, we've got a great history of that. So to me, I would maintain your separate sewer fund, just on that principle. Keep it nice and short.
Michael?
Stuart, okay, if I can ask you, what was it your intention to go through this list, sort of dealing with each one as we go along, making an assumption about the first one, since we've already made that decision? Was that?
That was, I thought that would be, I honestly think that if we were to go through this and come to consensus, it would give the guidance that the staff need, and they may go, yeah, that's where we were, and that's why the recommendation in front of us is exactly what it is, and when we can all go, okay, it fulfills these things. I have to be honest that I'd have a tough time myself passing that recommendation in the report and knowing how it fell on all of these points. And, I've read the report a few times. I've tried to absorb it. But the concept between capital user fees and local area services, the idea that some of the city is on sewers but isn't part of the main sewer area, that there's places that are different. So I'd like to, it's like anything. If you're building a foundation, it should be solid. Let's establish the principles. I think Cynthia's points about, we're going to get into difficulties down the road and things are going to change, and I get that. You can't sort of be hard and fast, but if you can start with the principles and look what we as a council believe is important in these things, it's going to provide the guidance that we need to stick handle through this, and maybe it'll change. And I guess I just have to be. When you threw out the concept, Doug, about it's an $11 fee, I don't think it's an $11 fee, is it? Do we know, Chris, what an average fee would be, or what it is now and what it might be on average? It said minus $11, I think.
Yeah, compared to previous. So for option one, for instance, which is levying on main average residential property, is about $293, and then option two is about $298. So very slight differences, and that includes any local area service that a resident might be paying, plus any sewer user fee that they might be paying altogether. So that's really all sewer altogether, except for the treatment plant.
So they're paying about $280, $290 now, and it might go up or down by $10. Is that the? Yeah.
Michael, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, having got that answer from Stuart, and in response to number two, I think that the sewers have been built based on the people who are going to use the sewer pay for the sewer. And I don't see why we wouldn't carry on with that principle. So that's the principle I support, just like Doug has, but perhaps for different reasons.
And I'm not sensing any dissension on that principle. So maybe we'll move on to number three.
And I think number three is probably the least controversial here, but it just we're not going to double tax. We're not going to charge them for the cost of the sewer plus the infrastructure replacement. So I think that's
That's pretty
I think we're all on side with that. I'd be surprised there's much debate on that. Oh, but
Yeah,
I've been
I think-
surprised before.
I think that was the intent of the.
That's what the
plan
report
too,
reads,
the
yes.
way the report reads. Cynthia?
I just have a question on that because when I read the report, it is something that I stumbled over because there's an inherent unfairness to charging the sewer capital replacement fee to people who have already paid off their sewer debt and not charging it to the people who haven't yet paid it off. So we have, wherever my paper just went, three user groups who have paid it off and two who haven't. But I think maybe I'm just catching up with myself here, but we weren't actually going to charge this until next year, is that correct? This year, okay. So, but the other Central and East, they are paid off next year, are they not? No, they're not paid off next, okay, never mind. I just was looking at the table on page 2 and thinking that since there was nothing in the third column, but now I realize it's a difference. Anyways, the problem for me is that fairness principle. Mm-hmm. Everybody else has to pay off their mortgage. We all have mortgages to pay off, whether it's for your sewer or whatever. And then we all have to pay insurance. So I find it kind of difficult to imagine simply saying, well, you haven't paid off your mortgage yet, so you get a free pass. That doesn't somehow seem fair. Either wait till everybody's paid off and then institute the sewer capital fund, or charge everybody equally, because otherwise some people are paying into the future and some people are not.
Michael?
Just in response to that point, I think that the people who have paid off are the ones probably who've been using their sewers the longest. I know it doesn't quite fall along those lines, but therefore, presumably their sewers are going to wear out the first. So I question whether that's unfair or not. But I think that the biggest problem to making a definitive decision tonight arises on this point. If we start collecting fees either by tax or, start collecting funds either by fees or tax, I think there's a legal difficulty in differentiating between who's going to pay it and who's not based on whether they've paid their debt or not. Now, I gather the solicitors haven't thrown up any red flags yet, but I think whatever we decide, if we're going to use that discounting those who haven't paid yet, our instructions to the CFO are going to have to be conditional on whether they can actually legally do that. And I think that makes going for the parcel tax right now actually really difficult, because if you wait for a definitive legal opinion, it'll be too late to implement the parcel tax.
Rob?
A great discussion, and I'm not meaning to discourage it to continue. However, I experienced at CRD where I spent over an hour on one subject only for us to defer it. And I was quite frustrated at the end because it was so I feel like I would just like to say what my point is, and just sort of I'm supportive of not implementing this sewer capacity levy this year. And I'm going to explain the rationale why. The rationale why for myself that I feel uncomfortable with it is I believe there's a lot of stressors that are on our tax payer this year. We've got the employer tax that we're having to pick up this year. We're implementing the general infrastructure replacement plan that's going to be burdening our taxpayers. And I think we put enough stress on our residential taxpayers this year. I think this is a great discussion, but I would feel as though in a year to 2 years from now, we're going to have a lot more clarity on a lot of issues, specifically around sewers too. I'm hearing from the community that there's a real general pressure to readdress the concept of us even looking at sewers for the entire city. I understand we've had 2 referendums in the past, but I'm hearing a lot of people who are asking that they would like their neighborhood sewered as well. I think we're going to be going into a lot of discussions in the next little while, and the truth of the matter is, I think if we postpone this 1 year, get our feet under our ground, or get our feet on the ground on all the other issues, and then look at this again in a year, I think it's great. I have no issues with our Director of Finance bringing this forward. I think it's very forward thinking. I just don't think it's the right time. So I'll be supporting option 4 tonight.
Okay. Michael, and then
I just quote the example of Oak Bay, if I may name somebody, who never found the right time to put in the put the money away to upgrade their infrastructure, and they're facing a really difficult situation right now, which is going to stress an awful lot of people hugely. But I don't totally disagree with Rob's point. I just want to stress that we mustn't put this off very long.
Stuart?
So a couple of points. Firstly, I think Councillor Day made a real good point. Is it fair? We're asking people to contribute to sewer infrastructure, but not you because you're still paying mortgage, in her words. Yeah, that's a good point, and those are I think the kind of principles that we should be debating and providing advice to staff for what this should look like whenever it comes. And I'm not here to live or die on whether it's implemented this year or next. I personally struggle with this, and so I think the fact that we're hearing under some of the decisions we make either have to make tonight or they're not implemented this year, and I think there's other decisions we make that could still be if they take a while, if we don't make them tonight. But I think the decision that we made to fund sustainable infrastructure for the community in the long haul would include sewers. So I think if we were looking at sort of increasing the set aside to the reserve infrastructure fund by an equivalent of 1% tax increase every year for the next 12 years, those numbers, I believe, would include sewers. So it's a question of, do we take some of those and say this is sewer specific and the rest of the infrastructure specific, or do they all go into the rest of the infrastructure this year, and in a couple of years we'll play catch up on the sewer infrastructure? Have I got that roughly correctly?
Through the chair, yes, sir. Anything that you raise via sewer levy would reduce the need to increase your infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure.
Sorry, Bob.
Yeah, but it's only 1 year,
Dean?
right? So it's not like
Yeah.
replacing sewer this year.
No, I hear that. Yeah.
Just for clarity, I asked a question a number of weeks ago. Would people currently paying, I'm trying to figure out which LSA I'm in up the hill. Does anybody know offhand? Carindale, Marianne area? Is that central?
I told him north.
Yeah.
There isn't a north.
Yeah.
Okay, so
He's like, oh, I'm in north.
let's go with central. So I still owe another $154,200 on my sewer. I'm not going to pay it all out, but my understanding is those of us who weren't that this tax user fee, what have you, would not affect people who are currently paying. Is that right? And it would be implemented as soon as that debt runs out?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay.
To ensure that it's fair with the previous ones who had 15-year amortization that have since expired, the bylaw was being drafted so that in the 16th year of Central, they would start paying.
Okay, so just to clarify, I think to
I
play
was
on Dean's
confused
point,
by what Cynthia had to say there, that pay your mortgage and pay your fee as well, or did I miss something?
So essentially, nobody that's not paying now won't be charged for the infrastructure replacement fee for sewers, right? And then you start paying towards this replacement fund as soon as your debt expires. But if you still have debt, you're not paying for the replacement fee.
Mr. Chair, very, very close. Sorry, just let me back up just a little bit to make sure it's crystal clear to council. So the two LASs that are expiring this year, being South and West, their amortization period was at least 15 years. So they've been paying into that debt for at least 15 years. Now it's over. In comes the infrastructure levy as proposed. Central started last year, so the idea that the bylaw would be drafted would be they don't pay any of this levy for at least 15 years. The 16th year they start paying, so it mirrors the same process as happened with the previous two that are now expiring.
Okay, so it's only South and West who will start paying this new fee only because they expired quite some time ago.
And those that are just in Maine. There's a few properties that are only in Maine.
So I think
Sorry, I've got Dean, you're done. And then Cynthia.
So, two things. One is, I believe there are sewer reserve funds within the sewer budget. I recall there was a sewer capital fund that existed. So there is an opportunity, I think, and I do really have a difficulty with lumping everybody all together. So because there's such a difference, right, with South and West being paid off already this year, and with there being 15 years to go for Central and East, I think that creates an inherent advantage towards some properties in our community. And if we were to charge a capital fee, parcel tax, to some and not to others. So maybe the way around that is that you could, for those who are paid off, you could have a capital reserve fund that's specific to those areas, which would be a way that you could still do it. The other issue that I have is with what we used to affectionately refer to as the super users. So Royal Roads University, Juan de Fuca, or West Shore Parks and Rec, and D&D, and I can't think who the other ones are, but all of those entities under the recommendation tonight would no longer be contributing whatsoever, except through the sewer user fee. And to me, that is problematic, because Royal Roads, when they first came online in Colwood, that was about a $400,000 hit to our budget in 1 year. West Shore Parks and Rec, likewise, has been, without those entities contributing to the costs of the sewers, there is a really large impact on our residents. And so, you know, I'm fundamentally opposed to them not participating as institutional users because they rely on those sewers just like everybody else does, and there are costs that the city has to bear to provide services to them, and they should be participating. So that's my concern that I would lay out, is that I think that they do need to have predictable costs so that they can manage their budgets from year to year, but I don't think they should be off the hook for the cost of sewers.
Stuart? And then, yep. point of clarification?
Thank you.
Rob?
So, can I please clarify? I didn't see that in the report. So, can I please clarify what Councillor Day has talked about? Because my experience, at least from the West Shore Park and Rec when I was chair, was that was one of our biggest issues, was because they were dropping pool water into the sewers and getting charged for that, and like they were basing usage on the amount of water that is used, and obviously all the water that we use at West Shore Park and Rec is not going back into the sewer system through ice and through the pool and through all that kind of stuff. And I remember us actually having a fight about this, and so we had to get a reduced rate. So can I just get a clarification through staff about that? Chris?
Yes, through the chair. Yes, West Shore Parks and Rec pays a sewer user fee for the operating costs of the sewer infrastructure. That's based on consumption. I can't tell you exactly whether they probably reduced the consumption factor in recognition of the pool. That's typical. So the sewer user fee option in today's report would certainly increase the cost to West Shore Parks and Rec and the other large four, because it would be based on their consumption.
I've got Stuart. He's been chomping at it.
Well, I am a bit, because we're jumping ahead. I think those issues on who should pay are item number 4 of this report, and I think we were sort of discussing the concept of, do we, as soon as you've paid off your local service area, do you start paying the sewer fee, or is that unfair? Is there some merit to that argument, or should we double tax, or what we should do? So I think, for clarity, we should make a decision on what do we do here with, when does it start? Does it start when the LSA ends? And I think my thinking on that is the people who have paid off their sewers through the LSA quite likely have sewers that are 15 years older than the people who are just starting now. So there's kind of some merit to say, yeah, you are paying into this fee, and others aren't paying it for 15 years, but then your sewers are probably going to collapse 15 years before the other ones do. And of course, nobody really knows what's going to happen or when it's going to happen or what it's going to cost, but we're just working on our best assumptions. But I think that's a rationale that maybe makes some sense and allows us to move forward if people are satisfied with that way of thinking.
Yeah, and I want to be cautious that we're not making a decision here. I think we just want to have a conversation, but we're not going to make a specific motion unless it comes up, of course. But we're just having a broad discussion based on the 5 points that you lay out. So, I think we're having that conversation, and whether we're going to come to a conclusion right now is, to be determined. But I take your point, and I think I'm not sure that we've received a clear consensus yet. But I do want to move on, because it's we've spent a fair amount of time on that one point, and I think we do need to move on to point 4. Michael, and then we'll move on.
I just want to beg the indulgence of the chair and the committee. Engineers make decisions like this, and they really don't know how to make decisions any other way. And we go through it step by step, eat the little pieces, end up with a big solution. Anyway,
I won't hold that against you either.
I just want to clarify on the big 3, or the super users, or whatever we want to call them. They don't pay taxes. So if we use a taxation method, they contribute nothing to this. If we use a user fee method, they contribute just like everybody else. So there's that choice to make at some point.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on to point number 4 here, because I think that's a conversation we're going to have anyways.
Are we going to leave point number 3 unresolved?
Yes.
Okay, point number 4. This is basically who should contribute, which I think a lot of the discussion obviously is of great interest to everybody. And there's a number of ways you could do it. Everybody who's connected to the sewer could contribute towards the reserve fund. Perhaps everybody who has the opportunity to be connected to the sewer. If the sewer runs down the front of your house, you're part of an LSA, but you haven't connected, should you be paying for it? Well, that's a different mechanism. Perhaps the entire community should be contributing like it does to the other infrastructure funds. Could be that in 70 or 80 years, when these things need replacement, that substantial majority of the community will be on there. I think number 2 probably addressed that, and so since I know the mayor's cranky and anxious to get out of here, we'll cross that one off. No further discussion. I'll see if that's all right, Your Acting Worship. And then all users that form part of the main LSA, in the report it talks that the main LSA was basically set up to catch these costs for operating and maintenance and future things. It just doesn't happen to cover the whole city. So if that was going to be the way, we would have to look at expanding it so it did include the whole city. So I think that's those are the questions.
Chris, do you have Stuart's page in front of you? So your report and the recommendation, which point A, B, or D would your recommendation fall under? Probably A.
Mr. Chair, the recommendation would fall under that. The problem is that the principle isn't achievable under the legal framework that is Colwood at the moment, unless you combined it. So you can tell staff to go implement a sewer user fee, capital levy, and a parcel tax, and that would cover anyone who has the opportunity to connect or who is in fact connected, nobody else. They would just be charged differently depending on where they are in the community, which does create a bit of an inequity. So the recommendation is a levy on LAS Main, which unfortunately excludes about 500 sewer users. The big 4 are some of those sewer users, but there's a bunch of other folks that are connected that aren't in an LAS, unfortunately, so it would not apply to.
All right, anybody have any comments on number 4, Cynthia?
So just on number 4, I think that the people who should contribute to a sustainable sewer infrastructure reserve fund should be all the people who are connected to sewers and all the users who have access to a sewer. So I think it does need to capture the big developments that aren't done yet, so that we do have some equity across the board, and that does put us into a position of not exempting the people who haven't finished paying off their sewer yet. So just to understand that, and I do think that my support would also be not to implement this year. I think, well, let's see, I've been on council for 17 years and I've been trying to become sewer literate pretty much for that whole time. And I still find myself in great difficulty in accomplishing that.
Amen to that.
That makes me feel better. Thank you, Cynthia.
So, and I've tried really hard. Like, I've really tried hard to, I've been to all kinds of presentations on different methods of sewage disposal and looked at how they do it in other parts of the world. I've met with proponents who had new and innovative ways that, maybe we could do this more affordably for people. I've met with the developers. I've talked to the super users who get super upset, and reasonably so, because for them predictability was one of the big problems. And as we had a lot of changes going on through the sewer system itself due to legal issues, it did really accordion for a few years. The sewer fees would be more, then the sewer fees would be less. And all the whole time, what council was trying to do was accurately charge what it costs us to provide the service. Like, nobody was padding the system or anything like that. So I'm just really intimately aware of how difficult it really is to do. And so I just think it's really important that we don't rush into it. I'm not saying that we stick our heads in the sand and forget about it, but there may need to be, I think, a very specific program that says that each of the local area service areas have their own fund so that they feel comfortable that they're not paying for somebody else because of the way the sewer system has been developed, has been very site-specific.
Thank you. Well, so we've... I'll make a motion. Yeah, by all means,
Thank you. I'll make the motion that we do not implement any sewer capital levy at the present time and bring it back for the 2020 discussion.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? Michael?
I oppose the motion in that format because I think that there are things we can do and that the staff can work on even if we're not going to implement it this year, such as this issue of whether it is feasible to write a bylaw which differentiates in either tax or fee between those who have already paid their debt and those who haven't. I have grave doubts about the ability to do that, and if we wait until next year and have the same problem, we're no further forward. I think at a minimum, we need to get an answer to that question.
So I think the motion's intent was we're not going to levy a fee or a parcel tax this year. We'll do it in 2020. But the work on making that happen wouldn't stop in 2019. So in terms of coming up to a strategy on which direction, which policy we want to go with, as opposed to leaving it to the 2020 budget discussions. Would I be right, Chris? So staff would continue working towards the goal. We just wouldn't institute it until 2020.
Okay.
And so which would address some of the
that allays that objection then. So the only thing I'd do is I'd put forward the idea as an alternative of introducing a very low user fee, which gets us started down the road, gets some money in the bank, but isn't something that's going to upset anybody. Raising, say, instead of the 250 or the 125, raising $50,000, say.
Thank you. Doug, a motion?
I'm going to support this motion, actually.
Actually.
Mainly, I'll tell you why. This was probably the most difficult document to actually read. I had a hard time with this. And it gets me kind of concerned that, we have 50 years of council experience and people are barely literate. And I tell you, I'm totally illiterate when it comes to this because I'm just, and I can't make a decision based on just this document alone by itself. I can tell you that right now. I'm just sitting there going, oh, good argument. And there's nothing that I can read to understand this. I looked all over for it, believe me. It was just confusing as hell. And so make me more literate, and I want to become, literate in it so that we can make a proper decision. Because right now it's all emotion, right? It's emotion. And there's nothing really hardcore scientific about this. I'm just having a hard time with this. So I'm actually going to support the motion.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. So, next steps, hey guys, you caught me. So next steps, Chris, what do you envision the process being?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll continue. I'll definitely continue to work with legal review so that if council so wishes to have a framework in place, whether it be a parcel tax or a sewer user fee, we can bring that forward to council, provide a bit more analysis, time for council to digest, a bit more time for council to digest. So staff will continue to do that. I also expect, although council never passed a resolution instructing staff to do so, for staff to reach out to the ministry to look at options for expanding the main local service area to include all currently sewered areas, and that would resolve much of the inequity discussed today if it's even possible to occur. So those sort of things staff are going to be undertaken naturally, unless council says otherwise.
Chris?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a bigger overriding issue here, and I think it's the understanding of how the sewer system was put together and how it actually works, who's connected and who isn't, to understand the general principle. And the other part of it is only 30% of the municipality is sewered. What are we going to do? We're only talking about a small portion. What are we going to do about the rest of the municipality unless we start making some plans to sewer the whole municipality over time? And I think the first step is trying to understand what it looks like right now.
Yeah, no, that's, and maybe that's why, that's part of the reason why we're struggling. I mean, those of us that have struggled all these years, every time we discuss sewers, and it never gets clear for whatever reason, no matter how the report is written. It's always confusing as hell. But understanding the baseline, I think, is probably a good idea, and then understanding where we want to go in the future. So we'll leave that with you fine folks. But I think we had a great discussion and some good basis for which staff to move forward on, so I appreciate that. So we will move on to final public participation.
Oh no, me again, right? So in the election time, I noticed that our now mayor, one of his objectives was to improve transit options to and from Colwood and within Colwood. So my question is, if citizens are interested in improving bus service within Colwood by suggesting a location for a much-needed bus stop, to whom do they ask? Is that council? Is that Victoria Transit? Is that the CRD? Is that a master planner keeping track of a transportation master plan? Who would an interested and concerned citizen speak to get some action on that?
Your worship, who happens to be on the Transit Commission.
Yes. I believe if you send that to me, and then I would take it to the Transit Commission and hand it off to staff. Staff make the decisions on where things are most efficient and effective. So that really is up to BC Transit. As far as I know, unless somebody else wants to correct me, I do not believe that we as a council can make suggestions to Transit, but Transit ultimately makes the decision on where those stops are.
So are you suggesting that I'm better off approaching Transit directly?
You certainly could, but also addressing it to me, because as I said, I sit on the board, so I'm more than happy to pass it on as well.
Okay, thank you.
Both would probably actually work well.
You just had a quick response
to that. Just because we have worked with Transit, but definitely through the mayor to the Transit Commission is going to work the best, and it is definitely up to Transit to determine what works for them in consultation. We advocated through the Disability Committee to move the stop down at Esquimalt Lagoon so that it would be on the same side of the road as the washroom there, and that took quite a lot of time and investigation to get that accomplished. And it's just been completed. So I just was going to add that, it does take time, but getting the right people on board, it can happen.
Thank you.
And then I guess just a closing comment would be, I see your seating layout has changed since the last time I was at one of these committee of the whole meetings. You're now much further apart. And although I'm no longer intimidated by you all sitting there, I know a lot of people are when they come up here to speak, and the wider the field of vision a person has to scan through, the more intimidating and the smaller the person speaking can feel. So I'd like to encourage you back to your nice, tight, everyone can see everyone else layout. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob?
I think part of the reason staff did this was there were some complaints from council that they were having a hard time seeing staff. And so we'll continue to work on that to try and figure out where those sight lines can work, and then still address what you're saying, Chris.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next meeting is same time, same place, April 1st. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Dean. All those in favor? Opposed?